Hi everyone. This is just going to be a short video about some of the equipment that is used in a laboratory. If you're taking an online class, you obviously won't have the opportunity to be using this equipment, but I like to show you the type of equipment and items that get used in the laboratory just so you have kind of a basic idea and a reference point for when you may, at some point in your college career, take a laboratory class where you actually do get an opportunity to work live in a lab. So I've just done a quick scan here of the lab bench that's set up here at Tunxus for a general bio lab that's going to be held during the semester. So let's talk about some of the equipment. First of all, one thing that's important to remember is that when we're working in a laboratory, we are going to be using the metric system. So everything that you see in a lab will be calibrated in metric units. Let's talk about volume first. So volume is just that, a volume of something. It may be a volume of a liquid, it may be a volume of air. But to measure volumes, we are going to be using what we call graduated cylinders. So that's what these two guys are right here. You see I have two different size graduated cylinders, and if you look on the sides of them, you'll see that they are marked with units. And the reference unit for volume is the liter, but generally we're not measuring in liters. We're generally measuring in what we call milliliters. So if you look at these graduated cylinders, you're going to see that they're marked in milliliters. We have a 50 or 100 ml graduated cylinder here, and then we have a 10 ml graduated cylinder here. And so you would choose whichever graduated cylinder was appropriate for the amount that you were measuring. So in other words, you wouldn't measure 3 mLs in a big giant 100 ml graduated cylinder. You'd use the smaller graduated cylinder. These are precisely calibrated instruments, and so that's why they're used to measure volumes in a laboratory. Inside this particular graduated cylinder is what we call a pipette. This is just a little disposable pipette. It does have measurements on the side, but generally we use this to transfer things. Okay. Now you're also going to find in the lab a couple of other glass instruments. And those would be a beaker, which is this one, and what we call an Erlenmeyer flask, which is this one right here. Now, beakers and flasks, you'll notice, have calibrations on the sides and measurements in mLs. You could measure a volume of a liquid in a beaker or a flask. However, a beaker and a flask is not a precisely calibrated instrument. And so generally we do not measure in beakers or flasks. Beakers and flasks in the lab are generally used for holding, storing, or mixing solutions, okay? And if you were to do a quick little experiment, you might measure out, say, on this graduated cylinder, you might measure out 50 mLs of some water. And you might pour it into this beaker or this flask, okay? Or I'm sorry, we'll do it the opposite. We're going to measure it out in the beaker or the flask. You can see the lines there. But then if you pour it into the graduated cylinder, it may be way off. 1, 2, 3, even 4 mLs. So these are precise. These are not precise. This mixing and holding liquids for these. The other thing you're going to see is I've got some what we would normally call rulers, right? So we've got a meter stick, okay, which is a big long, what we would normally call a yardstick, except this is not a yard long, this is a meter long. And we've got a smaller ruler here, and then we've got a tape measure. These are all calibrated in metrics, okay? So the reference unit for length is the meter, Okay, we can break that down into what we call millimeters, okay, which is a thousandth of a meter. We can also break it down into what we call centimeters, which is a hundredth of a meter. So if you look between the 60 and the 70 here, you'll notice there are 10 centimeters. If we go in even closer and we divide one of those centimeters up, there are 10 millimeters in a centimeter. So that's for measuring length. And then our last instrument that we're going to look at here is what we call a triple beam balance. Okay, so that triple beam balance is used to weigh things. Okay, and it's calibrated in grams. So when we look at the triple beam, okay, you'll notice the middle scale has hundredths. Okay, so 100 grams, 200 grams. The back scale has 10 grams. The front scale has 1 gram and then tenths of a gram. So this particular balance would measure up to tenths of a gram. So you would place the object on the plate, and then you would weigh it by moving the weights back and forth until you got this to balance. Now those two lines should actually be lined up. That way you would know something was balanced. And so those are some of the pieces of equipment that you would be using if you were actually taking this lab on campus. Over here you're going to see a microscope that's covered, and the next video actually that I'm going to be making is about the microscope.